Great to get a chance to talk to the Minister for Racing, Kieran McAnulty. Kieran, thank you for joining us on Weigh In.
Pleasure.
Some people would know, some do not know, that you used to work for the TAB as a bookmaker. Now you have far bigger responsibilities. Do you still feel that connection to racing?
Yeah, I do. I think it gives me a bit of pride to be the first bookmaker elected to Parliament. First legal one anyway. I don't know what they got up to back in the day, but no, look, this is something that I am very passionate about. It was a dream job at the time to be involved as a young fella employed as a bookmaker. I mean, there'd be many people in the country that would love to be able to do that, and I got that opportunity. There's not many people that have worked in that role.
No, they haven't. Your press secretary, Elizabeth, was telling me that trackside is always on in the office. So yeah. It's your channel of choice.
It is. It's important because, you know, it's unless you are solely focused on the industry, it's so easy to lose things. But if you've just got it on in the background, you do pick things up. You keep in touch with it, and I think it's important. One
thing you would have been keeping in touch with recently is postponements, abandonments of race meetings, track debacles, for want of a better saying. Is that something which can concern you at a ministerial level, or do you need to hand those to the industry and say, well, if this keeps up, we might get involved, but NZTR need to be in charge of this?
Well, that's how it's set up. I mean, it's done deliberately, is that ultimately, as Minister, I'm responsible for the legislative framework within which that the industry operates, but ultimately it is self-governing. So you've got the code bodies that they are responsible for that, and I have no operational responsibility. Even if I wanted to get involved, the law doesn't permit me to do so.
So you can't just pick up the phone and ring up somebody and say, what the hell's going on here?
I can ask questions, and I do, but I don't ever tell people what to do. But I can express concerns and ask questions about what is in place to be able to sort it out, because they need to know that I'm showing an interest as well. And obviously it was of concern. No one's going to put their hand up and say that that was okay, but I'm satisfied that they recognise that it is disappointing and they're going to put things in place. And that's all I need to know, is that they're on top of it at this point anyway.
Minister, one of the biggest issues over the last 18 months has been staffing and getting skilled staff in from overseas to work inside the industry. Is it a situation, for those of us who don't understand how a cabinet works, where you can have a quiet word in the ear of the Minister for Immigration and say, well, we need some help here? Is that how it works in the Beehive?
Oh, it's like anywhere. You're going to have formal conversations, you're going to have informal conversations. You might be having a feed at the lunch break or whatever, and you just pull them aside and have a yarn. And Michael's a good mate of mine, so we talk about all things relevant to our personal lives, but also our portfolios as well. And I've certainly made the point that you know, we need to ensure that the immigration settings are such that we can fill those skills gaps, but I'm actually confident that they are, because we're not the only industry that's suffering from this. That is across the board. We don't, in my view, need a specific green list like some industries do. As long as the general immigration settings are adequate and sufficient for the needs, which I believe they now are. It's easier to get a resident visa and a working visa in New Zealand now than it was before COVID. I think it's on us to promote the country and our industry as a place where people will want to come, and balance that out with growing our own talent as well. So I think the settings are about right now, but we've got to get together and promote it. And I'm keen to play my part in that too.
The government has had an enormous amount of things, very serious things to work on for the last 3 years, obviously with COVID and enormous societal change around that. During that space before you took this portfolio on, the Deputy Prime Minister was the Minister of Racing. Do you believe this government has an interest in racing? If you are to go to the bosses, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, or Grant Robertson, and say, we need this to be looked at, for example, we'll talk about the Gambling Act shortly, is it taken seriously?
Yeah, it is, and I'll give you an example to demonstrate that, is that when this government was elected in 2020, Grant Robertson picked up racing from the previous minister. He was already the sports minister. Now, there's a view out in the general public that why don't we just combine sports and racing like they do in other countries? We're one of only a few countries, not many at all, that have a specific minister of racing. That would have been the logical time to do it. There's a broad view that people misunderstand the need for a minister of racing. If they didn't care, they would have just combined it, and we would have never seen a Minister of Racing again. They didn't. They deliberately kept it separate. And I think that that's a message to show that they do see the importance of this industry and that it warrants having its own minister.
The Gambling Act is clearly outdated. It's from 2003, and obviously the world has moved on a lot, no more so than in internet-based gambling. What is the process to change and write a new law for the Gambling Act? Because it sounds an easy thing to change, and there'll be people in racing who want change, but I'm sure it's not that easy. So how does that process start?
Nothing's straightforward, is it? And ultimately it's on me to put forward a case that resonates with my ministerial colleagues, and I need to put that case together, which I'm in the process of doing. There are a lot of factors that I need to take into consideration and a lot of ideas out there as to how we might be able to do that. But I see my role as twofold. One, I want to be an ambassador for the industry and demonstrate to people why it's so important, why it warrants having its own minister, and why we should be considering intervening to secure it for the future, which then leads me to the second priority, is doing just that. You know, the racing industry is incredibly important to this country. It is a significant export industry. But in the general public's eyes, for many, it's just viewed as something to do on a Saturday, going down, having a punt on course, not recognising that it contributes just as much to the economy as the fishing industry. But we can't do those exports if we don't have a platform from which to promote our products, and that is the domestic racing scene. The two are interlinked, and to secure it for the future, we've got to look after the domestic racing scene first.
So how does that conversation start? Say, for example, you want to go, I presume, to Cabinet and say to the other ministers, we need to change this Racing Act, or the Gambling Act. Here are the reasons why. Do they need to support that and say, we'll be behind that? And if that does happen, what happens next?
So just generally, if you come up with an idea and you want to put it forward, you'll go to what they call the Cabinet Committee with an official outline of the issue and your proposed solution. You'll then get permission to go and do that work. No point going and doing work if it's not going to get past the first hurdle. So that is it. I present a paper, I'll say this is the issue and this is how I think we need to fix it, and this is how I'll go about putting something together. If I get the go-ahead, we'll go off and do that work. When that work's done, we'll then come back with the proposal, and if that proposal gets approved, then we can start pursuing the changes that we need to make.
For something like the Gambling Act, does that therefore eventually need to be voted on in Parliament?
Potentially, depends on what you're proposing. So what you might be doing is, depending on how the law is set up, a minister could change some regulations. So they'll go to a Cabinet Committee for approval to do the regs. They'll say yes, and they'll just go away and do it. You don't need to go to Parliament for that because that's already been set up previously in Parliament. But if it does require legislative change, you'll get the approval from Cabinet to introduce a bill. So you go away, get the bill together, you introduce it in Parliament, then you have the debate. If it passes first reading, it'll go to Select Committee so the public and the industry get a chance to have their say. It'll come back to Parliament for second reading, a thing called the Committee of the Whole House, third reading, then it's law. So there is a process here. And if we go back one step, so let's assume we need to put something into Parliament, the process of getting the work together covers all various aspects. So if we were, say, looking at restricting, as I mean, many of the articles that you've written talk about the potential for geo-blocking, that could have trade implications for the free trade agreements that we're signing, and not many people realise that that's the case. So we need to explore that to make sure that we're actually complying with agreements that we've made with other countries. And if it isn't, how do we get around that? If that's approved, then we can pursue it that way. So it's not as straightforward as just signing a bit of paper. There's a lot of work that needs to go into it.
With geo-blocking, many people listening or watching this show over recent weeks would have heard that the TAB and the codes are behind the idea of the TAB being given more or less a monopoly in New Zealand. What safeguards would there be under a new Gambling Act, or would you like to see written into a new Gambling Act, that would help people watching this at home? I want people at home, I want more money for the industry, Minister, but I want people at home to be given a fair shake. How do you safeguard that for future punters via a new Gambling Act?
I'm happy to go into it, but I just want to be really clear. This is a hypothetical conversation at this stage.
Absolutely. We're talking about what can happen, not what will happen, because obviously we're not there yet.
So I am looking at ways to secure the industry. and I'm pursuing that work at the moment, but as I've outlined, there's a process to go through, so I'll respect that process. But let's say if this was one of the options in which to do it, ultimately what we're saying is that if that happened, the TAB would have a monopoly in this country. Now, some people might think, geez, that's a big call. But if we go back to pre-internet betting, that's what the TAB was. That's what it was set up to do. And it was set up for a very specific reason, and that was to feed back to the codes and make our industry self-sufficient. There aren't many countries our size that have got a racing industry like we do, and a big part of that is because of how it was set up to begin with. Then comes along internet betting. And slowly but surely over various years, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars that would have been spent with the New Zealand racing industry is now being spent overseas. Now, there's been a bit of tinkering and a few changes over the years, so some of that money's starting to come back, but it's only a very small portion. So every dollar that's spent with an overseas operator is a dollar that could have been reinvested into New Zealand racing. That has an impact on stakes, that has an impact on the level of ownership. Therefore, we're not attracting as much sponsorship, we're not getting people on course, and eventually, over time, our racing industry that we hold so dear is under serious threat. So that's the challenge that we face. Now, geo-blocking might be a solution to that, and we're looking at that at the moment. But if you're, or any government is going to say, right, this particular industry is going to have a carve-out for valid reasons, that's got to have some trade-off. There's got to be a focus on harm minimisation, but there's also got to be a focus on allowing everyone that wants to be able to participate. Because the process of giving the TAB a monopoly is a pretty massive deal, but it doesn't mean that they can then be so restrictive that they can pick and choose who can participate. Obviously, they'll need to be able to look at restricting and still operate in a profitable manner, but they can't just simply cut people off just because they make too much money.
I think that's the fear, Minister, from people I deal with and people watching the show is, yes, the TAB may well having a monopoly help the industry, and we respect that the extra money would help, but that's not going to be much fun for people watching the show if they are restricted to winning a few dollars or a few $100 if they're bigger punters. Can we write that into an act, or is there a place where a minister has oversight to say, no, you need to give these people a fair crack? Because I think that's the fear, is that market percentages, which you understand and most people don't, will be too high, that restrictions may come in, that while Mike Todd seems to be very open to the customers as the TAB Chief Executive now, maybe the next TAB Chief Executive won't be. So those fears are real, and I understand them. What can you at a ministerial level or in a gambling act do to maybe allay some of those fears?
Well, at the moment, very little. I can make my expectations known, which I actually have, but they don't need to listen. I think it's important that politicians stay out of the operational decisions that are made within the industry, and I'm quite supportive of the way that things are set up. But ultimately, we want to ensure that if this is what we go down, that it's a fair playing field for everyone. We don't want to go too far one way, where it's an open slather. There's no, it's a free-for-all, and there's no responsibility around harm minimisation, because that's not good for the industry. You don't want to go down the other end where it's so restrictive that people can only bet $5 because the focus is too much on a restrictive approach. There's a big middle ground in between those two where everyone can participate, because I'm firm of the view that there is a big difference between a wagering product and a gambling product. They're both gambling. One, with sports betting and racing, if you're good enough and disciplined enough, you can make money. You can't say that about pokies and casinos. I've always held that view. It's a personally held view. But if we want to be able to maintain that distinction between those other gambling products, it's got to be a fair approach.
We share some common ground there. I believe you're right there, Minister. One thing I would love to see, many people would love to see for our carnivals is bookies back on track. Is that something you believe, as a man who's been on the other side of the fence, you think would add to our carnivals?
Well, aside from working on course at the Masterton Greyhound track, my real first foray into the betting industry was as a bookie in Ireland. And of course, over there, it is an open slather.
Wouldn't that be great for us?
It'd be hard to balance various operators and the structure that has protected our industry and kept it self-sufficient for so long. So in Ireland, they obviously have whoever you want to come in. They've got bookies on track and all that sort of stuff. It's a great atmosphere. We see it in Oz, we see it elsewhere. It adds to the buzz, it adds to the experience, and it may well help getting people on track. which in itself would be great, but none of them are feeding into the industry. And ultimately, Ireland survives because it's so close to England, and it survives predominantly as a breeding ground for other markets. We are a little bit too removed to be able to do that by ourselves. We're too small to have, in my view, a completely open market that doesn't feed into the industry. So there's that balance. We want to be able to ensure that the punters get a fair go. We want to be able to ensure that harm minimisation is a priority, as so too is animal welfare. But we've got to set it up in a way that supports the industry. That's how the TAB was set up to begin with. It's still in that respect. They still hold an on-the-ground monopoly. You know, these overseas operators, they can't advertise and they can't operate, but they can operate online. So if that was the original intent and it worked well and it kept our industry going so well for so long, perhaps that is justification to consider that moving forward, inclusive of online gambling.
Minister, animal welfare is a huge issue in general society, as it should be, but obviously in racing. There's been a lot of discussion about the potential to restrict or ban the whip in racing. Is that something which gets to a ministerial level? Is that something the government is interested in, that conversation? Or do you believe that's something which is handed back to the codes for them to implement if in fact it ever happens?
Well, I was actually reading the draft animal welfare approach for thoroughbred racing last night, and I have to say I was really impressed. I was really impressed with the fact that they identified that this is an issue, and that in my view they've got a pretty robust policy in place around how they're going to approach that. They've engaged with the likes of SPCA. They are working with them, identifying their concerns and looking to incorporate them into the policy. They're looking broader and dealing with other equine sports and pursuits like equestrian, for example, to bring that aspects into a rehoming program. It's really solid stuff. They've identified that any sport that involves animals must operate at the highest level of animal welfare to maintain its social licence. They've seen other codes potentially, or other sports that might not have placed as much of an emphasis as they have on this, and they are having serious questions asked of them, and they've recognised that there is a natural progression of those discussions. So if they can get ahead of it and get something robust in place, that secures them for the future, and I have to commend them for that. I think they've done a great job.
You said you occasionally pick up the phone and talk to the bosses of New Zealand racing. There are 3 codes, of course, and the TAB. Are you confident we have the skill sets and the knowledge to take the industry forward in a rapidly changing world?
Absolutely. I think that we have the huge potential, and the passion in the industry and those that participate in it bodes well. But I do sense that it isn't universal, that there is still I suppose, a way of thinking that might not be recognising the challenges, might not be recognising the potential threats, because in identifying those, you can do what NZTR have done and are trying to manoeuvre in front of it to maintain that social licence. I want to see a sustainable and profitable racing industry for all participants. It's good for the country. It's good for regional New Zealand, which is what motivates me as well. And you know, we are world leaders in breeding. We've got the best jockey in the world. We've got the best driver in the world plying their trade overseas, and as massive ambassadors for New Zealand and our racing industry. That's too good to let go. But we've got to set things up. We've got to recognise that we've got to stay ahead of public opinion, because ultimately it's no different to any other primary industry, any other primary exporter, is that we've got to give the customers what they want. And ultimately we can't do that unless we keep the public on side.
Personal question. On a Friday night or a Saturday morning, do you open up the phone, go to the TAB app and still have a bet?
Yes.
Any good?
No.
You're not alone there.
No, well, I mean, when I was there, I was immersed in it, right? So I was hearing all the yarns and I was watching it constantly. It was my world. There were no other distractions. So to be the racing minister is a huge honour for me. It genuinely is. I'm proud of being that. I think in the past, and it's been, you know, for a long, long time, it felt like the racing portfolio was sort of like an afterthought. It was sort of the one at the bottom of the list. They just dished it out or whatever. I was the one that put my hand up. I want this. I'm hugely passionate about it. But when I was at the TAB, that's all I was thinking about. Now I've got racing and emergency management, which is, you know, with the amount of severe weather that we're having, that's a pretty full-on portfolio, associate local government and associate transport as well. So I'm not as immersed in it as I was. And I left the TAB thinking I was a pretty good punter. Turns out I just had good information. I'm not a great punter at all, but I still love it.
Well, it heartens me to hear you're still opening the app and having a dig. Minister, on behalf of the people inside the industry, thank you for the work you're doing, but also thank you for coming on Way In to inform us more about it today.
It's a pleasure, and when we've got a bit more to announce, I'd love to come back and just dive into it in a bit more detail with you.